My birth name is Leo Frank Mellinger. I go by Lee. I have for a very long time. Um, I was born and raised in Van Nuys. Went to Lutheran Grammar School for 6 years. Then went to Robert Fulton, then junior high school, now middle school, now something else. Van Nuys High School for 4 years. Then I went to, I tried to get in, I wanted to get into University of California in engineering. I took the acceptance test. I passed everything, all the acceptance tests, but the engineering school had a separate exam. I took that, and they just counted down the scores until they reached their maximum and then cut it off. The maximum score, maximum score that year was 140, and I was 139. So I went to Valley College, which turned out to be a better thing actually, because it's way cheaper, even then, and did 2 years. But I was not doing well academically, and those were the days of the draft. Okay, and my numbers started coming around, and it was getting close enough. I had to start making up my mind. What did I do? I had a college. I could add a college deferment, but given my performance particularly my last semester at Valley College, I decided to join the military and get that over with. But the last thing I wanted to be was a ground pounder. So, Army or Marine Corps. I was too, how let's put this, I was too technically inclined. When I wound up taking the AFQT, the Armed Forces Qualifying Test, I scored 90 and above. So I pretty much had my choice. And I said, electronics, what else? So off I went. I do remember the trip down there. You always remember that. I enlisted, it turns out I didn't know this until fairly recently. The day I enlisted was the birthday of the Air Force, 18th of September. So it's easy to remember that. And we took a 2-day trip to San Antonio on the train. That was interesting by itself because I'd never been on a train, and certainly never that long. It was kind of interesting. There's 30 of us. Of course, they booked us in rooms, and in those days the rooms had connecting doors, so we just opened all the doors up. And
pick that up in a minute.
Okay.
Tell us more about your family.
Okay. I have a brother, and I had 2 parents. My grandparents, I had, my father's father and mother, his father was from Kentucky, and his father was from Germany. My great grandmother on his side is Sqdrn Irish, and I've tracked them. I've done a fair amount of looking around, and I've tracked them back to Scotland and Ireland and a couple of places. I have found my great grandfather in, what's the name of it? I've forgotten the name of the town now, but it's in the Black Forest area of Germany. On my mother's side, they're both German. They came from the Berlin area. I've had less luck with them because their name was too common. And my brother's...
I'm sorry. Go
yeah.
ahead.
And my brother currently lives in Minnesota. He moved there about 25, 30 years ago. He got tired of it wasn't the climate. Trust me. But he got tired of, he didn't like the way California's laws went. He's a conservative kind of guy. And he changed his career. He went from a project manager at Teledyne to a financial advisor, got his MBA at Pepperdine, and became a certified financial advisor. And he's still living in Minnesota. Both my parents are deceased, my grandparents. In fact, my brother and a cousin and 2 cousins are the only ones left out of my family. On my mother's side, there were 10 kids, so it's surprising that there's so few left. The ones I have contact with, as I get more distance, I have less contact. I don't know any of them. Really, just the immediate family is my brother.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And that's it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So you're in Lackland.
oh yeah, wonderful Lackland.
Yeah.
We got there at 4:30 in the morning. The train opened the doors up and it was like walking into a wall.
Uh-huh.
This is September, so
Yeah, yeah.
it was very hot and humid. And of course they loaded us on a bus and off to Lackland we went. The usual wonderful introduction of Lackland. The DI gets onto the bus and starts yelling at us about getting off his bus, very loudly. And we were off. He marched us through. I remember that much. He marched us, got us into a formation. That was interesting, and then marched us off to the barracks they had for us. Of course, there were some guys hanging on the. These are the old World War II barracks. They were 2-story, wooden floor, open bay, and they had a deck on the side, on the end, and there was guys hanging out there and yelling at us about being rainbows. Of course, we're all in civilian clothes. That's the reason. Yeah, you just, all of this starts rolling off you. You just kind of you capsulize and keep your head down. And I learned quickly, don't volunteer for anything. They did make me the chow runner, which turned out to be a good thing too, because the TI would send me off to go to the chow hall to give them the count, and so I got to sit there while they got to march around for a while. Anyway, we left, was it the 1st of November? I was assigned to Lowry Air Force Base, and to the, well, then I didn't know it. I had a choice of Sqdrn. We got another train, the old Katy line. Oh, that was horrible. That train trip was bad. That line's long since gone. But we got to Denver at about 8:30 at night, and it was already getting quite cold there. We stepped out. Oh yeah, not a wonderful TIs. Had to see, you're going to Denver. It's going to be warm there. Wear your lightweights. Yeah, we got to Denver, and it was not. It was cold, and we froze our buns off until they got us to the barracks at the base, and we could smell the base. They used coal fire furnaces, and so there was no doubt. Spent a weekend with then it was called PATS, Personnel Awaiting Training, and then did 10 weeks of fundamental electronics, and then was there from November all the way to the following June for what was bomb nav school. I got a choice of 6 career fields. 4 of them were fire control in fighters of various sorts. One was gunner, what turned out to be the fire control system for the guns on the tail of B-52s. I'm glad I didn't pick that, because that is a filthy job. You have to clean those guns. 6-foot tanks of trichloroethylene. Anyhow, so I wound up in bomb nav, which turned out to be probably the best choice I could have made. Bombing navigation systems on B-52s. I spent 3 years, 3.5 years doing that. Flight line repair. Eventually, flight line repair is one thing, but my technical mind always wanted to get inside, and those were black box switches. You change boxes out mostly. You had to find it and then change it out, and you work in really sometimes very confined spaces where the radar navigator, the bombardier, and the nav sit in the lower deck of the B-52. They have all this array of equipment in front of them, right? And almost all of that belonged to bomb nav. But you had to get behind it to get to some of the equipment, and you had a slot about that wide to get through, and then turn a corner, go back behind it, and you worked in a space maybe about that wide, pulling cables, or in one case the stabilizer was a 3-axis gyro stabilizer, this big piece of equipment, just probably 2 feet in diameter, 2.5 high, and there were three gyros, high-speed gyros in there. That whole thing was so big it had an access panel on the bottom of the B-52. Thank God we didn't have to change. We only changed 2 of those when I was there. They were a pain. because all of the sheet metal screws around that hatch, all of them had to come out. The whole thing had to be jacked out and a new one jacked in. It was no small task. Everybody figured at least a day and a half just to do that. They didn't do the trivial. You changed gyros. You got inside. The old troops, B-47 had then a similar system, very similar. The equipment was almost all the same, but the Bombardier, the radar navigator, was right in the nose, and the stabilizer was right here, and the optical sight went down and over the top of it. So in order to get to that, you had to get back there, and you had to take the cover off of the stabilizer. The cover, this was analog computers. You had motors and gyros and differential units, all mechanical, and they were driven by motors, 300-volt DC motors that were bidirectional. Well, the cover was like this. The periscope was here, and you had to stick your head in here to reach back to align a synchro. There was a motor right here with its two terminals, and in order to reach it, you had to do this. And if you got your chin on that motor, you got a bolt of electricity, and then your head would hit right up here. So anybody that worked on B-52s on that bomb nav system and wasn't careful, you could always tell, because there'd be a little scar there and a little scar there. Interesting stuff. I never worked on the B-47. I worked only on the B-52s. Eventually, I got off the flight line and worked totally on the radar system in the shop. I got to take the units apart and fix them and put them all back together. And that was closer to my liking. Changing boxes was not fun. But somewhere about in the middle, maybe 1964, they sent me off to school. They were changing the systems in the B-52s from the totally analog mechanical systems to analog electronic, and adding what they call terrain clearance radar to it. They changed the radar set. Lots changed, mostly in the radar system, but there was called a ASQ-48 system and ASQ-15 bomb nav system. They sent me down to Castle Air Force Base, for a 3-month class, where that was a lot of changes. That was a huge change to the radar system. It was almost completely different, and it was none of this stuff was simple. My God, nobody realized that. Today, everything's in little, very small boxes. They're all microelectronics. This thing, they created what they called a terrain clearance computer that took the radar signals, and instead of just sending out a radar signal in a fan like this and getting what they call plan view, it had two waveguides that were divided. So you had 4 you could pick from, and you could look at them this way or this way, which changed the mode of the system. Typically they used it this way, and that showed you elevation difference, which showed up on the pilot, and the pilot now had screens, CRTs, and he could set what they called a clearance plane wherever it was, and any of the terrain in front of him that protruded above the clearance plane would show on a scope, which means if he set the clearance plane even with his plane, he would see what's right in front of him, solid. So and you can move it up and down. Typically, they moved it down to 500 feet, and flew. That was the standard altitude for low-level runs, was 500 feet. Now they were making low-level runs. It's not the high-level bombing anymore. It's an interesting way to fly. Part of the time, well, in fact, almost all the last 2 years, I was on flight status, which means I had to ride the plane's flights 4 hours a month to collect my money. But anytime there was a problem with the planes or something that couldn't be duplicated on the ground, or they wanted me to check, I flew those flights. Those were not, flying a B-52 is not like riding in an airliner. Everything is hard. There's very little padding. You have one seat between the radar navigator and the navigator. There is a seat off to the side and behind it for a spare crewman. There's another one upstairs. There's actually two upstairs on those planes. One was the instructor pilot seat, which sat between the pilot and co-pilot and back of it, and another one which is just basically sitting on flat metal plates and seat belts and oxygen. Typically, when I was on those flights, I was the only one there that was superfluous from the crew. So I pretty much got my choice of where I wanted to sit, and frequently sat in the IP seat, because that's fun. Unless we're making a bombing run, and then it'd be downstairs watching our stuff work. One incident that happened, I was working in the shop on radar, and that was strictly day shift. And about 4 in the afternoon, about when time I was ready to pack it up and go back to the barracks, they come screaming in there and says, "We have a plane on the pad, and the radar's out. We need a new RT unit, receiver transmitter." And you're on flight status. Go. Somebody else went over to personal equipment and grabbed a parachute and helmet, and I was put in the launch truck and went screaming out to the end of the runway. The plane is sitting there, everything's running, all the engines are up, hatch opens up goes the parachute, up goes the new RT unit, there goes the helmet, up I go, they slam the hatch shut. I had probably a couple of minutes to get everything squared away, get the RT unit upstairs, which is where the RT unit was located. It wasn't in the bottom. I had to get it up those little narrow stairs and up the top and then down. The RT unit sat right behind the co-pilot. Oh, diverged slightly. The modulator, the radar modulator, sat right behind the pilot. And it was a pretty big unit, about so big around and about so tall. And it generated the high voltages and currents necessary to power the radar. Most pilots had no idea what that was. We had orientations where the crews would come into the shop at the mock-up, and everything's out and exposed. There's a cage, the modulator's there with the cage over it, because there's these giant high-voltage hammers that switched voltage and current. And every time you did that, it would draw a current off of it and snap. I always make sure to get the pilots close to the modulator if I could, and then change it, and they go, crack! And that's the reaction you get. So what's that? And where is it? I said, that's the modulator, and it's right behind your seat.
Yeah.
that always was good for a laugh. Anyhow, they threw me into the plane. They were sitting on the end of the runway, and I started changing the RT unit because it was dead, and it was pretty clear that it was the RT unit that was bad. So I started changing it out. I had 2 big connectors, 6 BNC connectors, just little snap-in clips, and the dual waveguide. Waveguides held in my little Allen screws, 8 of them. So I'm laying over the top of this, taking all this stuff off. I get it off. I don't know how long they sat there. I have no clue because I was in a hurry. I got it out, got the new one down, bolted down, and started putting the thing together, and I hear him say, "Well, we got to go." Oh, crap. So I'm laying over the RT unit as they swing onto the runway, and off they go, and I'm still trying to put this thing back together. And there's no clue. I mean, I could put this all in here, and it still wouldn't work. And that would be mission over. So it turned out, it finally did. When I got it all in and hooked up and I had them started, it worked. But now I'm at the beginning of a 14-hour flight. I was going back to the barracks, eat and watch TV and go to bed. This wasn't happening. So I was on there for 14 hours. This crew was not so friendly crew. Typically these crews were pretty good about it. They understood your problems, and in a case like this, these guys always got these little box lunches. They just sandwiches and cigarettes then, and packages of other stuff. And typically they'd share some of it with you. You didn't have anything. Not these guys. I had coffee and cigarettes for 14 hours. By the time we got back, it was 10 o'clock in the morning. They had to do a couple of the pilots need so many landings each month to qualify, maintain their qualification. And this guy needed 2 or 3 or whatever. And they did what they call taxi backs. They land the plane, go to the end of the runway, taxi all the way back to the other end, and take off again. I'm on the plane. I'm quite superfluous at this point, and as you come back, the taxi back go right by base ops. And I asked them if they could just let me open the hatch and get out. Nope. I was on there for all 3 or 4 taxi backs. God. By the time I got back to the shop, I was wiped out. I mean, really wiped out. And then one of my supervisors, not realizing that I hadn't just come in, said, "Okay, you can get started now." I let him know. I'm already, what would that be, 24, 30 hours. That was the end of that. I was really wiped. That was the worst trip I ever had. But B-52s are not fun either. There's no soundproofing of any kind.
Yeah.
You wear the helmets to keep your sanity, but the helmets get heavy. They're not that heavy, but man, after all that time, they really are uncomfortable. It's the reason most aircrew, at least in those days, had fairly short hair. Anyhow, this is the time I was in SAC, Strategic Air Command, which I still consider today the best command the Air Force ever had. It was the big tip at the end of a very large spear, and it had no equivalent in the world. But yeah, well, promotions in the Air Force those days were not good. You were lucky if you made Airman First Class at the end of 4 years, and they dangle Staff Sergeant if you would re-enlist. When in fact, before and after that period, Staff Sergeant was fairly common to make in 4 years. Not when I was there. But I was Airman First Class. Here's where that extra 2 years counts. The Air Force changed that designation from Airman First Class to Sergeant, typically called Buck Sergeant. And so I'm either Airman First Class or Buck Sergeant, depending on what period of time you're talking about. They literally later they changed it back and made it Senior Airman. Yeah, so now it's Airman Basic, Airman Second Class, Airman First Class, and Senior Airman. The Air Force is terrible with that stuff. I mean, they're great at so many things, but they're bad at and uniforms. They've gone from okay uniforms to really, I consider the current uniforms inadequate. I'll be nice. Okay. They look like suits, for the most part. I had a few, there were some things that were actually kind of interesting and sometimes actually nice. Like one of them, it was both nice and not. I rarely wore the blues uniform for the Class A uniform because I worked. I didn't, the uniform, I didn't even wear the Class Bs very much, 15, then 505s. But twice when I was there, they had a parade, and we got drug into it, so we had to march on a parade. That was interesting, but it was interesting being in it, to see the whole thing. One of them was change of command. That was what it was. We got a new commanding officer for the wing, but the whole thing was, they coached us, because none of us, the Air Force is not a spick and span marching service, so we got coached on exactly what to do and when, right, for all of it. That was interesting.
Did you ever do any TDYs anywhere?
One just for the the school and at Castle. That was but no, SAC is was a pretty fixed in place kind of thing unless something happened. Actually, when I got out, yeah, right after I separated, about 2 months, Vietnam was becoming very active. Actually, the Vietnam thing impacted our wing maybe 18 months earlier. We had a squadron of KC-135s, and they started doing missions in Vietnam before anybody ever knew about it for quite some time. But I knew they were up to something when I saw a couple of the COMNAV troops who were going with the KC-135s, and they were packing 38s. Huh? you guys? Yeah, we can't talk about it. And so they were flying off to Vietnam. 2 months about after I separated, the wing got orders to Guam, the bombers. They were going to start using them. So I just missed. Nevertheless, I'm credited with service during the Vietnam War.
So did you get any leave time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Did you have some fun?
Well, usually I went home. I did, let's see, I don't remember the year, but it was either 63 or 64. I did take some leave and took a hop with one of our KC-135s to Hawaii. It was going to service in a task force in Japan, but of course they made a fueling stop at Hickam, and there were maybe 8 of us or so who went along and then stayed in. They were supposed to come back in a week and pick us up at Hickam. So we went over there and we spent 6 days at Fort de Russy. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's still there. It's quite different now, but it is a fort operated by the military as an R&R site for all service. It had what were probably converted barracks, but they were converted into actually fairly nice little places. And we stayed there. I think the charge was like $3 a day. And it was right on, what's that street name? Well, the Fort de Russy goes right down to the beach. It's right next to the Hawaiian Hilton. And it has about, I don't know, 300 feet of beachfront, maybe more. And there's a fort there with old cannon emplacements. Yeah, we went all around the Waikiki area. And we got back one day. It was 6 days in. We were supposed to leave, we thought, the next day. And the guy's there screaming at us. He says, "It came back early! The plane was back early! Jam your stuff in the bag and get the hell in the car!" Because the pilot they were already fueling, and they're trying to round up the people that had gotten off because they knew they'd be stuck. Actually, it would have been, had to try to catch a flight somewhere after that, and that would have been probably to Travis, and then somehow get a flight from Travis to Fairchild, which is very unlikely. Anyhow, so they jammed us all in this car, and off we went. It turns out the pilot decided that, what was it he said? Well, he had a problem with the plane. And they had to go out and look at it, and they still hadn't arrived. So somebody got customs out, and they wanted to check everybody's baggage for contraband. So, and we got there when the baggage was just going back on the plane, and we came screaming out there. That was close. That was an interesting ride too, because being a tanker, and not refueling, the refueler's position was a vacant. You could go back there, and that had a spectacular view because the bottom of the plane had the windows. Actually, the whole thing came up, and the arm went down. But that was just a spectacular view when you're over land, over water.
Yeah.
That was fun. Actually, that was a fun time. Most of the time when I was on leave, I'd come home because I hadn't been home for sometimes more than a year. So I did one time. I drove. The hell was it? It was in winter, and I drove. Well, okay, when I had a I was on another TDY. I forgot about that. I went to a 1-month instrument school at Lowry, and in those days you could travel in your own vehicle, but you had to make it in the same time as common carrier. Now, this was in either end of December or early January, and the morning I was supposed to leave, it was snowing like hell. It was coming down in just buckets, and I fired it up 6 a.m. off the base and down the road. It was really heavy going. 395 south from Spokane is 395, 95 or something like that, 97. Anyway, that's a combined run. It runs down to past the Tri-Cities area in Washington, Pasco, forgot the rest of them. Anyway, so I drive down there, but this is a 2-lane U.S. highway. The snow is already. I've got a Corvair that I had bought. It has a metal pan for floor, and the snow. I could only tell I was on the road because there were trees on either side, but it was completely white with snow. And the only way I could tell I was not on the road anymore is it started getting rough, and I could feel the snow pushing on the pan on the floor. That was interesting, a little scary. But by the time I got to, I've forgotten the name of the town. It's where 395 goes south. It had stopped snowing and was almost reasonable, and I drove all the way down to where did I wind up? That was in Oregon, and then was taking the road across, and I've forgotten the number of the road. It might have been 80. But I made the turn down there and drove that road until it got close to the Rockies. I stopped at a restaurant, filled my thermos up with coffee, and got out, and I saw Oregon Patrol there and drove on out and went up the hill. It turns out I was the last car through. The Oregon police had closed it right behind me. Oh, it was okay. I mean, it wasn't bad in the mountains, but I got down on the other side in Wyoming, and oh my God, it was clear, but it was. I'm driving along, and suddenly you feel a car do that, and it finally dawned on me that I was running over black ice, little patches of black ice, and I had better slow down. I got up to Little America. Have you ever heard of that one? Yeah. I went to turn off because I needed to get gas, and it wouldn't turn. Car wouldn't turn. There was so much snow packed in the wheel wells that there was just this narrow slot, and I had to slow down and use the steering wheel to turn the wheels into the snow to melt it, get it hot and melt it. And I got the next one. That was a weird experience. And I got to Lowry, to the base, to the Sqdrn. What do you call him? The guy that takes care of his
Radio.
Yeah, no, not the anyway. But you got to check in with them there.
Yeah, ready.
Yeah. So I got there. I was supposed to be there by 5. I was there at 5:03. He did not want to check me in because I was not on time. He did finally. I spent a month there messing around in Denver. It's a nice place.
Yeah.
I still like Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice. I was born
Were you really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the places we used to hang out there are all gone now. We went on a vacation, and this is like 10 years ago or so, maybe. And I went back to Lowry and took a look. And the only thing remaining are one of the big hangars, which is now home to the Air Museum, and a B-52 out in front of it. It wasn't one I worked on, but the one at the Academy, the Air Force Academy, the one they have on pedestals there, I had worked on in the past. Anyway, and the old headquarters building is still there. And the building where they taught the bomb nav systems, it's a Quonset hut-shaped building. And that building is still there. I couldn't believe it. Holy cow. Yeah, I got out, after I got out, I went to, well, I was an electronics technician. So I started back to school. I went to Valley College for, well, from 65 to 73, I believe. Yeah, and picked up all the requirements. I actually changed majors. I had been an engineering major, but I couldn't get the engineering classes, and I wanted computer science then. That was my thing. And they didn't have it, so I wound up getting the requirements for the business school at Northridge, because they had then, I've forgotten what they call, quantitative methods, which really is where they put all the computers. And transferred out of Valley College to Northridge, and eventually, part-time, got my bachelor's degree, and a few months later went back for the master's degree and got a master's in computer science, which had then been, they finally had a computer science school, so I went there and got my master's. And in the meantime, I'd worked at, well, I went to work for IBM. IBM had me in for an interview, and NCR, in those days, National Cash Register, had a facility down in Hawthorne. I wound up going to NCR. IBM was just starch all the way, and what they wanted me to do was work on an old System Development Corporation Sage computer, which was all vacuum tubes. 20,000 vacuum tubes in each half, and they worked. One worked 24 hours, and then they switched to the other one, because this one had to go through PMs, and you had to start winnowing out tubes going bad. And that was your job, doing margin tests and pulling vacuum tubes. It wasn't anything I was interested in. So I went to work for NCR, and they were building then second-generation computers going to third generation. And that's when I really got into digital computing. Worked for them until they decided they moved south to Rancho Bernardo. They bought the entire top of the hill down. I think they still own it. But what remains, that's another long story. NCR, AT&T in fact, eventually bought NCR in a 2-year fight. And 4 years later, AT&T split them off because they didn't know how to run it. Yeah. And so they're an independent corporation again. Anyway, so Control Data Corporation, CDC, took over that facility, and we manufactured disk drives there for quite a while.
Yeah. I did 9 months of Control Data.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Learning to do little things on computers because I couldn't get anything in school.
Yeah, well, they had, CDC had, Cal State Northridge had two of the 7600 or whatever out there. Anyhow, but they decided to close, they were going to close that division, and so I got laid off actually from CDC, but I was already, they beat me to it because I was ready to quit. I knew that this was going to be a bad thing. And I was looking around, and I always wanted to get into the space business and systems, whatever, and I wound up interviewing with Ford Aeronutronic, who had the Deep Space Network contract. And I went to work for them. 18 months later, JPL offered me a position with them instead of being a contractor, and I was with them for 30 years in a number of projects. I worked in the DSN, the Deep Space Network, for 10 years on a whole lot of projects. Then went back to, well, then JPL decided they wanted to contract out a lot of the DSN. So they expected all these people that were working in the DSN for the contractor, I'm sorry, for JPL to go over to the contractor. It's exactly, they got exactly 100 of them. Everybody else found other jobs in JPL. So, and I started working there. I worked on the first? Was, oh, Mars, man, most people don't even know of it these days. It was one of Dan Golden's faster, better, cheaper projects. We always said you can do 2, not 3. Pick 2, but he tried they tried it, and they used an RCA weather satellite that used the bus for Earth and converted it to Mars Observer, which was intended to go into orbit around Mars. By the time it got to Mars, they pressurized the fuel system to do the burn, and they never heard of it again. That was the end of it. And given the little telemetry they got, and they did some checking, they discovered there was a valve in there in the fuel line that was intended for Earth orbiting work and only used when it first went into orbit. Well, this thing had been out there for 2 years. It turns out the valve leaked, and the fuels were hypergolic. That means they go off on contact with each other. That's what happened. Blew out all the fuel lines.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was gone. Then I went to work for Cassini. And I worked for Cassini up until the day I retired. I worked as a the real-time systems, as a system engineer, testing, integrating, and since this was, what would you call it, a highly leveraged, despite the fact that it was a $3 billion project, everybody did everything. I wound up, as a mission controller and the data engineer, the first 30 days of launch, we covered it continuously, so I was in there, in and out of there a lot on off hours. And I was served as a mission controller up until the day I retired. And I was also a manager of the flight system test bed at the same time, because work is slippery there. They call it a matrix organization, but you know, it means basically you can do lots of different things at the same time. So
Wow, that's quite a track record, buddy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I start looking at it, you know, it's like, wow, really? I met Carl Sagan there. He was there for a number of times. I met him there. Who else? I met a whole, completely disconnected from all of that. I graduated from Van Nuys High School. At that time, there was a guy going to Van Nuys High, 2 of them actually. I can't remember the other guy's name. Vince Cerf, and most people may or may not know his name, but he's one of the 2 people at UCLA that basically invented the internet. They were the guys who wrote the first one, then ARPANET, and what was called an IMP, an image message processor, interface message processor, and that was the start of the internet. ARPANET became a center. They used it in lots of military and facilities, and eventually changed the name from, it was ARPANET, then Milnet, and then they converted Milnet to the internet. So that's another piece I had a little piece of. Actually, at Northridge, my advisor was doing some work on the then nascent internet, so I wound up doing a little work on that, just as a graduate student. Yeah. So another piece. Wow.
Fingers and everything.
Yeah, I know. It's just amazing when you look back on all this stuff.
Yeah.
Ooh, wow.
All right, now we got it on video.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, somebody may see it someday. You never know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I'm always interested in how you feel the military changed you as a person.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was an interesting story. Like I said, my last couple semesters at Valley College were very bad. I don't know. I still to this day don't know why, but I was not doing well academically. I really, literally busted calculus, and that should never have happened.
Yeah.
And I was extremely depressed about that. How, what am I going to do now, kind of thing. That partly drove my enlistment into the Air Force.
Yeah.
I credit the Air Force with changing my attitude and how I did things. I did go to classes when I was in the Air Force at at Fairchild, Eastern Washington State University, conducted on-base classes, and I retook college algebra, for example, just to keep myself in line, and I realized that the discipline that I have been subjected to had changed the way I did things, and I did much better. Now, when I got out and I started back again, I had to take those calculus classes, and I retook them, and they were still, I wouldn't call them not easy. Calculus, I like mathematics, but I had a real problem in remembering everything and getting it right. But I managed to get B's on my calculus, which to me was a big win, because I had flunked one of those classes. So I think that was 4 semesters of what they called analytic geometry and calculus.
Just a little extra discipline.
Oh yeah, well, more than a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. But when I started getting through it, and I only took those classes, I did not take, like 3 or 4, and these were all at night. Everything except the classes I could not get at Northridge were night classes.
I did the same thing.
Yeah. Total time to get my master's was 18 years from beginning to end.
15.
Good.
But I didn't do the masters.
Yeah, but people sometimes don't believe that, and nobody ever paid a cent for that but me. And I have serious problems with all these student loans, and especially the really big ones.
Different world.
Oh, yeah. Anyhow.
We're the lucky ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I paid for everything.
Yeah.
Every single red cent.
Yeah. All right. Take a deep breath.
Met my wife at Valley College.
Good. Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. Well, there's required classes, and one of them is the biological science, which I wasn't terribly interested in, and almost all of them included a lab, which I was really not interested in, because I had to take night classes, and those were not offered at night. And I was trying to figure out what to do, and I found out what everybody else in that particular one found out. There was an anthropology class called biological anthropology, and it satisfied the biology requirement, and it was just a classroom on biological anthropology. And I got taken this class. In fact, the classroom that was in, they just recently tore down. The bungalows from 1949. Anyhow, I was in that class, and I was sitting next to this woman, and I was my usual self then. If questions, they asked questions, sure, I'll answer it. So then I started talking to her, and I said, at that time they had a little cafeteria at the far southeast part of the campus. One of those outdoor ones, the kind they used to use for LAUSD, the little outdoor. They were all inside, and they had this outside access. Anyhow, you want to go for coffee? Sure. That was the beginning. And she later sat next to me after I figured out I was the one answering all the questions, because she was one who usually sat in the back of the class and tried not to be seen. And she's going to kill me when she sees this.
Any last minute thoughts you think you'd like to throw out, just in general?
Nah,
If somebody asked you about going into the military, what would you tell them today?
Do it.
All right. There you go.
The Air Force was a good thing in my life. I can't say it. Yeah.
But we were in at the right time.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
always true. Everything changes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something else we learned at my age. Everything changes. Yeah.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
Dan, thank you.